A desperate signal. The night was quiet, the kind of silence that stretched endlessly across the barren desert, broken only by the occasional whisper of wind brushing against the sands. Ethan sat on a weathered rock near his small campfire, staring up at the endless expanse of stars. He loved this time of night. It was his escape from the chaos of daily life, the perfect place to think and dream about things beyond Earth. But tonight felt different. The air seemed heavier, and the stars above seemed to shimmer with an unnatural intensity. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. He laughed it off as his imagination running wild. After all, the desert could play tricks on the mind. Then it happened. A blinding streak of light tore across the sky, brighter and faster than any shooting star Ethan had ever seen. It crashed into the horizon with a faint rumble, shaking the ground beneath him. For a moment, the fire flickered, as if the earth itself had taken a sharp breath. Ethan's heart raced. He wasn't the type to ignore something like this. While most people might have turned around and headed home, Ethan grabbed his flashlight, slung his old backpack over his shoulder, and started walking toward the distant glow. "What's the worst that could happen?" he muttered to himself, his voice steady despite the unease creeping into his mind. As he neared the source of the light, he realized this was no ordinary meteor. The glow wasn't fading as it should. Instead, it pulsed with an eerie rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. Ethan quickened his pace, curiosity overpowering caution. When he reached the site, he froze. A sleek, metallic object lay half buried in the sand. It wasn't large, maybe the size of a small car, but its design was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. Smooth, seamless, and glowing faintly, it looked more alive than mechanical. Strange markings etched into its surface pulsed with soft blue light, like veins carrying energy. Ethan's breath caught. This can't be real," he whispered. Yet there it was, undeniable and alien. Before he could take another step, the object hissed, releasing a plume of mist that sent chills down his spine. A panel slid open, and a figure stepped out. Ethan instinctively raised his flashlight, its beam illuminating the form of a tall, humanoid woman. Her skin shimmered like polished silver, her eyes glowed faintly violet, and her movements were fluid and deliberate, as if gravity barely touched her. Ethan expected fear to grip him, but instead, he felt something else. Curiosity. She raised her hand, palm outward as though greeting him. He lowered the flashlight, keeping his gaze steady. The alien woman spoke, her voice melodic yet firm. "Human," she said, her accent strange, but her words clear. "Do you not fear me?" Ethan tilted his head, studying her. "Should I?" he replied, his tone calm, almost challenging. The woman's glowing eyes narrowed. She took a step closer, the sand beneath her feet undisturbed by her weight. "I am not of your world. Your kind fears what it does not understand." Ethan shrugged, a small smirk playing on his lips. "Maybe I'm not like most people." For the first time, the alien woman seemed unsure. She had expected panic, retreat, perhaps even hostility. Instead, this human stood firm, his heart rate steady, his gaze unwavering. It was as if he had no instinct for self-preservation, or something stronger than fear kept him grounded. "I am Scylla," she said finally, "a seeker from a distant world. I came to understand your kind." Her voice grew sharp. "And yet you are not behaving as expected." Ethan chuckled softly. "Sorry to disappoint, but if you're here to understand us, maybe I'm your guy. Name's Ethan." He extended a hand, his gesture earning a puzzled look from Scylla. She didn't take his hand. Instead, she stepped back, her glowing eyes scanning him. "Your courage is unusual, or is it ignorance?" "Neither," Ethan said, lowering his hand. "I've seen enough of life to know fear doesn't solve anything. So, why don't we start over? You're here to learn about humans, right? Well, I'm here to listen." Scylla's expression softened, though her guarded stance didn't waver. The silence between them stretched, the only sound the faint hum of her ship and the crackle of Ethan's campfire in the distance. Finally, she spoke. "Very well, Ethan. But know this, your fearlessness will be tested." Ethan smiled, a spark of defiance in his eyes. "Bring it on." The desert around them seemed to hold its breath as the two stared at each other, a human and an alien, caught in a moment that neither fully understood. One curious and unyielding, the other intrigued and cautious. Whatever lay ahead, it was clear that this encounter was only the beginning. A test of courage. Sila's violet eyes glimmered in the firelight as she watched Ethan with quiet intensity. The human's demeanor perplexed her. She had encountered dozens of species across the galaxy, most of which crumbled under the weight of fear. Yet here was a lone human, standing unarmed and unshaken before her. Was it arrogance, foolishness, or something far more dangerous? True fearlessness. "Why are you so calm, Ethan?" Sila's voice was steady but laced with curiosity. "Your kind thrives on fear. It is your survival instinct, yet you act as though I am no threat." Ethan poked at the fire with a stick, sending a shower of sparks into the cool desert air. "Maybe you don't seem like much of a threat to me," he said with a smirk, though his tone carried an undercurrent of sincerity. "Or maybe I've learned that being afraid doesn't solve anything." Sila's head tilted slightly, her metallic skin catching the flickering glow. "An interesting philosophy," she said, almost to herself. "But let us test it." Before Ethan could respond, Sila raised her hand. A ripple of energy emanated from her palm, bending the air around her. The fire between them flickered and then extinguished, plunging the desert into darkness. A low, resonant hum filled the air, growing louder as an enormous holographic creature materialized beside Sila. The beast was a nightmare-given form, towering over Ethan with glowing red eyes and razor-sharp fangs. Its roar shook the ground, echoing through the desert like a thunderclap. Ethan instinctively stepped back, but caught himself, planting his feet firmly. His heart raced, but he forced himself to keep breathing steadily. "That's quite the party trick," Ethan said, his voice strained but steady. "But I've seen worse." Sila's expression didn't change, but she noted the way Ethan's pulse quickened. Fear was there, buried beneath the surface, but he refused to let it take hold. She waved her hand again, and the creature lunged at him. Its claws passed harmlessly through his body, revealing it to be nothing more than an illusion. Ethan didn't flinch. "Impressive," Sila said, lowering her hand. The beast vanished into thin air. But courage is not the absence of fear. It is the mastery of it. Are you certain you understand the difference? Ethan shrugged, his smirk returning. "You can throw all the illusions you want at me, but they're just that, illusions. Fear only has power if you let it." Sila narrowed her eyes, her curiosity deepening. "Let us see how far your philosophy can carry you." She gestured toward her ship, which pulsed faintly with an otherworldly light. The sand around it began to shift, swirling into the air like a rising storm. Ethan shielded his face with his arm, squinting as the storm enveloped him. When the sand settled, the landscape around him had changed entirely. He was no longer in the desert. Instead, he stood in the middle of a dense alien jungle. The air was thick and humid, filled with strange, guttural sounds that echoed through the trees. Massive bioluminescent plants pulsed with an eerie glow, casting flickering shadows across the forest floor. "What the?" Ethan muttered, turning in a slow circle. "This is a simulation," Sila's voice echoed from nowhere and everywhere at once. "A test of your resolve. Many creatures have perished here. Let us see if you will join them." Ethan clenched his fists, scanning his surroundings. A rustling sound caught his attention, and he turned to see a pair of glowing yellow eyes peering at him from the underbrush. Slowly, a creature emerged. A sleek, feline predator with razor-sharp claws and a row of spines running down its back. It growled low in its throat, circling Ethan like a hunter stalking its prey. Ethan's heart pounded. but he refused to panic. He crouched slightly, picking up a sturdy branch from the ground and gripping it tightly. The creature lunged, and Ethan swung the branch with all his might, striking it across the snout. The creature yelped and backed away, circling him again. "This is pointless, Sela," Ethan called out, his voice echoing through the jungle. "Whatever you're trying to prove, it won't work. Fear doesn't rule me." The jungle fell silent. The creature vanished, and the dense foliage melted away like a fading dream. Ethan found himself back in the desert, the campfire reigniting as if nothing had happened. Scylla stood before him, her expression unreadable. "You are an enigma, Ethan," she said. "Your kind should not possess such resolve, yet you defy every expectation." Ethan shrugged, lowering the branch. "Maybe it's time you rethink what you know about humans." Scylla stared at him for a long moment, her glowing violet eyes reflecting the firelight. Then, almost imperceptibly, she smiled. "Perhaps I will." The tension between them eased, but the questions in Scylla's mind only grew. Ethan had passed her test, but she knew this was just the beginning. If humans truly possessed such resilience, what else were they capable of? As the desert wind carried the scent of burning wood into the night, Scylla made a decision. She would stay longer, observe more closely. This human, and perhaps all of humanity, was far more than they seemed. "You are an enigma, Ethan," she said. "Your kind should not possess such resolve, yet you defy every expectation." Ethan shrugged, lowering the branch. "Maybe it's time you rethink what you know about humans." Scylla stared at him for a long moment, her glowing violet eyes reflecting the firelight. Then, almost imperceptibly, she smiled. "Perhaps I will." The tension between them eased, but the questions in Scylla's mind only grew. Ethan had passed her test, but she knew this was just the beginning. If humans truly possessed such resilience, what else were they capable of? As the desert wind carried the scent of burning wood into the night, Scylla made a decision. She would stay longer, observe more closely. This human, and perhaps all of humanity, was far more than they seemed. Shared vulnerabilities. The desert morning arrived quietly, the stars giving way to a pale blue sky as the first rays of sunlight stretched over the dunes. Ethan was still seated by the campfire, watching as Scylla paced near her ship. She hadn't spoken much since her failed tests the night before, but her thoughtful expression told Ethan that she was far from finished with him. Finally, she stopped and turned to face him. "You confuse me, human," she said, her voice softer than before, but still carrying an edge of formality. "Your actions defy my understanding. I have seen your species' records, wars, betrayals, destruction, and yet you speak of hope and courage as if they are your guiding stars." Ethan leaned back against a rock, arms crossed. "You're not wrong. Humans can be a mess, no argument there. But we're also capable of a lot more than what's written in your reports." Scylla studied him for a moment, then motioned toward her ship. "Come," she said. "There is much I still need to see." Ethan hesitated for only a second before standing. He wasn't sure what he was getting into, but something about Scylla intrigued him. She wasn't just testing him. She was genuinely trying to understand him. As they stepped into the glowing interior of her ship, Ethan's breath caught. The walls seemed alive, shifting and pulsing with energy. Strange symbols floated in the air like holographic screens, displaying data he couldn't comprehend. The air was cool and smelled faintly of metal and ozone. "This is incredible," he said, his voice filled with awe. Scylla barely glanced at him, already manipulating the floating symbols. "Your awe is noted," she said dryly. "Now observe." The ship hummed, and suddenly, the walls around them transformed. Ethan found himself standing in the middle of a bustling alien city. Towering structures of light and metal stretched into the sky, and beings of all shapes and sizes moved through the streets below. It was a scene of order and precision, every movement purposeful, every interaction efficient. "This is my world," Scylla said. a society built on logic and strength. We do not succumb to emotion or chaos as your kind does. Yet we thrive. Ethan nodded slowly, taking it all in. Impressive, he admitted. But it feels cold. Cold. Sela repeated, her tone sharp. This is perfection. Ethan turned to her, his expression thoughtful. Maybe to you, but where's the connection? The messiness of living, the drive to overcome something bigger than yourself. Perfection's nice, sure, but does it inspire anyone? Does it make people want to fight for something? Sela opened her mouth to respond, but the ship's hum interrupted her. The city dissolved, replaced by a new scene. Ethan recognized it instantly, a small, crowded village somewhere on Earth. It was midday, and the streets were alive with children playing, vendors selling their goods, and neighbors chatting. Sela frowned. Why has it brought us here? She murmured, almost to herself. Before Ethan could answer, a commotion broke out in the square. A young child had wandered too close to a cart carrying heavy barrels, and one of the barrels tipped, threatening to crush the boy. Without hesitation, a man dashed forward, pulling the child to safety just in time. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers, surrounding the man and the boy with relief and gratitude. Did you see that? Ethan asked, his voice almost reverent. That's what I'm talking about. It wasn't logic or perfection that made that man act. It was something deeper, something you can't measure on a chart. Sela watched the scene, her expression unreadable. You call this strength? She asked finally. An impulsive act driven by emotion. Ethan nodded. Absolutely. Strength isn't just about power or control. Sometimes it's about risking everything for someone else, even if it doesn't make sense. The ship hummed again, and the scene shifted once more. This time, they stood in the middle of a disaster zone. Buildings were reduced to rubble, smoke filled the air, and people worked tirelessly to pull survivors from the wreckage. Ethan could feel the weight of the scene, the despair, the urgency, but also the hope. Strangers worked side by side, sharing food, offering comfort, and refusing to give up. Sila's voice was quieter now. This is chaos. And yet, they do not flee. They don't, Ethan said, stepping forward, because that's what makes us human. When things fall apart, we come together. We rebuild. We hope. For the first time, Sela seemed genuinely shaken. She turned to face Ethan, her glowing violet eyes searching his face. Hope, she repeated, as though tasting the word for the first time. It is illogical. And yet it seems to drive everything your kind does. Pretty much, Ethan said with a grin. Hope's messy and irrational, but it's what keeps us going. It's why I wasn't afraid of you last night, because no matter how bad things look, there's always a chance to make them better. Sela stared at him, her mind racing with questions she couldn't yet form. She had come to Earth expecting to find weakness, chaos, and fear. Instead, she found something far more complex and far more powerful. Perhaps, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, I have underestimated your kind. Ethan chuckled, leaning back against the wall of the ship. Don't worry. We're full of surprises. The ship's hum faded, and they were back in the desert, the campfire still glowing faintly against the morning light. Sila looked at Ethan, her expression unreadable. This journey is far from over human, she said. If what you say is true, there is much I still need to see. Ethan smiled, his gaze steady. Then stick around. I'll show you what hope really looks like. A glimpse of humanity. The sun hung high in the desert sky, casting sharp shadows across the sands as Ethan and Sela walked side by side. The alien ship glinted faintly in the distance, its sleek design a sharp contrast to the rough, natural beauty of the landscape. Sela had been quiet since their last conversation, her mind clearly preoccupied. Ethan didn't push her. He could tell she was processing everything she had seen and heard. Finally, Sela broke the silence. You speak of your kind strength as though it is rooted in your imperfections, she said. But how can chaos breed resilience? How can weakness lead to survival? Ethan smirked. Why don't I show you? He led her to the nearby village, a small but lively settlement nestled at the edge of the desert. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, where life was simple but full of connection. As they approached, the hum of daily life grew louder. Laughter, the clatter of tools, the chatter of family sharing stories. The first person they encountered was an older man repairing a broken fence. He glanced up at Ethan and offered a wide smile. Morning, Ethan. Who's your friend? Just someone passing through, Ethan said, keeping it vague. Thought I'd show her around. The man chuckled, wiping his hands on his dusty overalls. Well, you've picked the right day. Market's in full swing. Ethan nodded his thanks and led Scylla deeper into the village. As they walked, Scylla observed everything with a critical eye. The streets were lined with makeshift stalls selling fruits, vegetables, handmade goods, and trinkets. Children ran barefoot through the dirt, their laughter echoing through the air. Neighbors exchanged friendly banter, sharing stories and jokes as they worked together to set up their booths. This is what I meant, Ethan said, gesturing around them. These people don't have much, but they're happy. They look out for each other. That's where our strength comes from. Scylla watched as a young boy dropped a basket of apples, scattering them across the ground. Before he could start picking them up, 3 other children rushed over to help, laughing and teasing him as they worked together to collect the fruit. This cooperation, Scylla said, her tone thoughtful, it is not driven by necessity. It is voluntary. Exactly, Ethan said. We help each other because we want to, not because we have to. It's not logical, but it works. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near one of the stalls. A woman was arguing with a vendor over the price of a blanket, her voice rising with frustration. Ethan started to step forward, but before he could, another villager approached the woman and handed her a small pouch of coins. Take it, the villager said with a smile. You need it more than I do. The woman hesitated, then accepted the pouch with tears in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered, clutching it to her chest. Scylla watched the exchange, her expression unreadable. This kindness, she said slowly. It is inefficient, illogical, yet it appears to create harmony. That's humanity for you, Ethan said with a grin. We're full of contradictions. Scylla turned to him, her violet eyes narrowing. But this harmony is fragile. What happens when resources run low? When survival is threatened? Ethan's smile faded, replaced by a more serious expression. We've had our share of struggles, he admitted. Wars, disasters, times when we've failed each other. But even then, there are always people who rise above the chaos. People who remind us what we're capable of when we work together. As they continued through the village, Scylla saw more examples of what Ethan described. A group of women teaching a young girl how to weave a basket. A teenager helping an elderly man carry a heavy load of firewood. A farmer sharing fresh vegetables with a neighbor who had none to trade. Your species is far more complex than I anticipated, Scylla said finally. You thrive on connection, yet you embrace individuality. You are capable of destruction, yet you build. It is contradictory. Maybe, Ethan said, but those contradictions are what make us human. They reached the edge of the village, where a small group of people were working to repair a damaged well. The air was filled with the sounds of hammering and laughter as they worked together, their hands dirty but their spirits high. Scylla watched them for a long moment, her expression softening. In my world, she said quietly, we have eliminated all inefficiencies. Emotion, imperfection, individuality, they are seen as weaknesses. Yet your species has built a society where those very things create strength. Ethan nodded. It's not perfect, but it's ours. Scylla turned to him, her gaze steady. Perhaps I was wrong to judge your kind so quickly. There is more to humanity than I understood. There always is, Ethan said with a wink. Stick around, and you'll see even more. As they walked back to the desert, the sun dipping lower in the sky, Selah felt something shift within her. For the first time, she began to see humanity not as a flawed and chaotic species, but as a paradox, a fragile yet powerful force driven by hope, connection, and resilience. And she knew her mission was about to take an unexpected turn. The revelation. The desert had quieted into twilight by the time Selah finally spoke. She stood at the edge of Ethan's campfire, her gaze fixed on the horizon, as the first stars appeared in the sky. The flickering flames cast long shadows across her metallic skin, giving her an almost ethereal presence. Ethan, seated on a worn log with a steaming mug of coffee in hand, watched her with curiosity. He could sense something heavy in her silence, like a storm brewing just beneath the surface. He decided to wait her out, knowing she'd speak when she was ready. I have been withholding the truth from you, Selah said at last, her voice low but steady. About why I came here. Ethan straightened, setting his mug aside. I figured there was more to it than just curiosity, he said lightly, though his tone carried an edge of caution. So, what's the real story? Selah turned to face him, her glowing violet eyes meeting his. I am not merely an observer. My people sent me here on a mission to evaluate your species. We have watched humanity for decades, gathering data and studying your behaviors. My task is to determine whether you pose a threat to the galactic order. Ethan blinked, taken aback. A threat? Bus? He let out a short laugh. Lady, I don't know if you've noticed, but we're still figuring out how to keep our own planet in one piece. What kind of threat could we possibly be? Selah's expression remained serious. Do not underestimate yourselves. Your species has demonstrated remarkable adaptability and resilience. You have achieved technological advancements far beyond what should be possible for a species so young. And your unpredictability. It is unsettling. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Unsettling? Or just something you can't control? Selah hesitated, her gaze flickering back to the fire. Perhaps both, she admitted. My superiors believe humanity is a danger, an unstable force that could disrupt the balance of the galaxy. They see your emotions, your individuality, as liabilities. But you don't agree, Ethan said, his tone careful. Selah looked at him sharply. I don't know what I believe anymore. Everything I have witnessed here defies my training. Your people are chaotic, yes, but you are also capable of profound compassion and unity. You embody contradictions that I cannot reconcile. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. So what happens now? Are you going to send back some report and let your people decide if we're worth keeping around? Selah didn't answer right away. Instead, she raised her hand, and a small glowing orb materialized in her palm. It pulsed softly, emitting a faint hum. This is my data core, she said. Everything I have observed about humanity is stored here. Once I transmit it, my mission is complete, and my people will make their decision. Ethan stared at the orb, a knot forming in his stomach. And if they decide we're a threat, they will act, Selah said simply, decisively. A heavy silence fell between them. The implications were clear. Selah's people wouldn't hesitate to eliminate humanity if they deemed it necessary. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. You've seen enough to know we're not perfect, he said finally. But you've also seen what we're capable of when we come together. We're not a threat, Selah. We're just human. Selah studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. You truly believe in your species' potential, don't you? She asked softly. Absolutely, Ethan said without hesitation. We screw up, sure, but we also grow, adapt, and find ways to make things better. That's what makes us who we are. Selah's gaze dropped to the glowing orb in her hand. Perhaps I need more time, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. There is still so much I don't understand. Ethan leaned back, letting out a slow breath. Take all the time you need, he said. But if you really want to understand us, you have to see the big picture, the good, the bad, and everything in between. Sela nodded slowly, closing her hand around the orb. The hum faded as the light disappeared, leaving only the crackle of the fire and the vast silence of the desert. "You are an unusual being, Ethan," she said finally. "I expected fear, resistance, or even hostility. Instead, you offer me trust. It is unsettling." Ethan grinned. "Get used to it. That's kind of our thing." Sela turned back to the horizon, her thoughts a tangle of uncertainty and curiosity. The mission she had embarked on was no longer as simple as it had seemed. Humanity was no longer just a subject to be analyzed, but a puzzle to be unraveled, a species that challenged everything she thought she knew. As the stars brightened overhead, Ethan leaned back against the log, his gaze fixed on Sela. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: this alien encounter was far from over. United strength. The wind carried the scent of the desert, cool and dry, as the campfire cast flickering light over Ethan and Sela. They sat in silence for a long time, each lost in thought. The stars above were bright and countless, a reminder of how vast the universe was, and how small humanity seemed in comparison. Yet to Ethan, the size of the universe only made humanity's resilience all the more remarkable. Finally, Sela broke the silence. "You spoke of your people's ability to overcome, of unity in the face of adversity. But words are insufficient. If I am to understand the true depth of your strength, I must witness it firsthand." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What do you have in mind?" Sela stood, her metallic skin shimmering in the firelight. "Take me to your people. Show me their greatest triumphs and their darkest struggles. Only then can I decide whether your kind is as remarkable as you claim." Ethan chuckled softly, standing to face her. "Well, that's a tall order. But if you're serious, I know just where to start." The journey began at sunrise, with Sela's ship carrying them to a bustling city. From the sky, it looked like a patchwork quilt of steel, concrete, and glass. Towers rose high, casting long shadows over crowded streets teeming with life. Sela's violet eyes widened as she observed the city below. "This chaos," she said, her tone sharp. "How does it not consume itself?" Ethan smirked. "That's the magic of it. Somehow, it works." They landed discreetly, using an abandoned rooftop as their entry point. Ethan led Sela through the maze of streets, pointing out everything from towering skyscrapers to bustling food vendors. Everywhere they went, Sela watched with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. At a hospital, she saw doctors and nurses moving with urgency, their faces lined with determination. Patients filled the hallways, some crying out in pain, others clinging to loved ones for comfort. Sela hesitated at the threshold, her metallic hands twitching. "This is a place of suffering," she said quietly, "and healing." Ethan countered, gesturing toward a young girl walking unsteadily but smiling, her leg wrapped in a fresh cast. "For every moment of pain, there's someone working to make it better." Sela watched as a nurse knelt to comfort an elderly patient, her voice soft and reassuring. "Compassion," Sela murmured. "It is powerful." Their next stop was a disaster relief center on the city's outskirts. A massive storm had swept through the region weeks earlier, leaving behind destruction and despair. Volunteers moved tirelessly, distributing food, blankets, and supplies to those in need. Sela's gaze swept over the scene, her expression unreadable. "Why do they do this?" she asked. "These are strangers. They owe them nothing." Ethan shrugged. "That's just how we're wired. When someone's in trouble, we step up. It doesn't matter if we know them or not." He led her to a makeshift shelter where children were laughing as a volunteer read them a story. Despite the cracks in the walls and the lingering signs of the storm's wrath, there was warmth in the room, an unshakable sense of hope. Sela turned to Ethan, her voice tinged with disbelief. Your people endure so much, yet they continue to build, to hope, to care for one another. How? Ethan smiled. Because we know things can get better, and as long as we believe that, we keep going. The final stop was a monument, a sprawling park dedicated to those who had fought for justice and freedom. Ethan guided Selah past rows of statues and plaques, each one telling a story of courage and sacrifice. These are the people who stood up when it mattered most, Ethan explained. They fought for what was right, even when it cost them everything. Selah stopped in front of a statue of a woman holding a child, her face etched with both determination and sorrow. They fought not for themselves, she said slowly, but for others. Exactly, Ethan said. That's what makes us human. We don't just survive. We fight for something bigger than ourselves. As night fell, Selah and Ethan returned to the desert, the city's lights fading into the distance. They sat once again by the fire, the silence between them no longer heavy but thoughtful. You have shown me much, Selah said at last. Your people's strength is undeniable, though it is unlike anything I have encountered. It is not born of power or precision, but of resilience and connection. Ethan nodded. Told you we're full of surprises. Selah turned her gaze to the stars, her violet eyes reflecting their light. I came here to determine whether your kind was a threat. But now I see that you are not defined by your flaws or your chaos. You are defined by your ability to rise above them. She paused, her voice softening. Perhaps I have much to learn from your people. Ethan grinned. Welcome to humanity. The desert wind whispered around them as the fire crackled, its warmth a quiet reminder of everything Selah had seen that day. For the first time in her life, she felt something unfamiliar stirring within her, a fragile but undeniable sense of hope. And she knew her mission had just taken a turn she could never have anticipated. The ultimate choice. The desert night was still, the stars scattered like a billion watchful eyes above. Selah stood by her ship, her metallic skin glowing faintly under the moonlight. The fire Ethan had built crackled softly nearby, but neither of them spoke. The weight of the moment pressed down on them both, unspoken but undeniable. Selah turned the glowing orb in her hands, the data core that held every observation she'd made of humanity. It felt heavier than it should, its contents carrying the power to decide the fate of an entire species. Her people were waiting for her report, expecting her to confirm their fears about humanity's potential for chaos. But her time on Earth had changed her. She glanced at Ethan, who was leaning against a rock, his face calm but his eyes sharp. He knew what was at stake, but he didn't push her for answers. He just waited, trusting her to make the right decision. Finally, she broke the silence. I have always believed in the logic of my people, she said quietly. Our way is orderly, efficient, and controlled. There is no room for emotion, no tolerance for chaos. When I was sent here, I was certain your kind would only confirm the superiority of our ways. And now? Ethan asked, his voice steady. Selah hesitated, her violet eyes meeting his. Now I see that your chaos is not a weakness. It is a source of strength. Your emotions drive you to protect, to create, to fight for what you believe in. You thrive not in spite of your imperfections, but because of them. Ethan gave a small nod. Told you we're complicated. A faint smile tugged at Selah's lips, but it faded quickly. But this understanding comes at a cost. If I report to my people that you are a threat, they will act. They will destroy you to preserve their order. Ethan's expression darkened. And if you tell them we're not a threat? Selah's voice was grim. They will not believe me. They will accuse me of bias, of failing my mission. They will send others, and they will not hesitate. So either way, humanity loses, Ethan said, his jaw tightening. That's a hell of a choice. Selah looked down at the data core, its glow casting faint patterns across her hands. There is another option, she said softly, but it comes with great risk. Ethan leaned forward, his interest piqued. I'm listening. I could erase the data, Selah said, her voice barely above a whisper. I could destroy this core and tell my people that humanity is not ready for contact. It would buy you time, perhaps decades, perhaps centuries, to grow, to prove your potential. Ethan frowned. But what about you? If they find out you lied, they will exile me, Selah said simply. Or worse. The word hung heavy in the air. Ethan stood and walked over to her, his boots crunching softly against the sand. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes searching hers. Why would you do that? You don't owe us anything. Selah met his gaze, her voice steady. Because I have seen your strength. I have seen your hope, your compassion, your resilience. I believe your species is worth saving. Ethan swallowed hard, a lump forming in his throat. He'd never thought of himself as the kind of guy who could change someone's mind, let alone save humanity. But here he was, standing in the desert with an alien who was willing to risk everything for his people. You're serious about this, he said, more a statement than a question. I am, Selah replied. But the decision is not mine alone. If I do this, you and your people must prove me right. You must show that you are capable of rising above your flaws, of becoming something greater than what you are now. Ethan nodded, his voice firm. We will. Selah closed her eyes, holding the orb tightly in her hands. For a moment, the glow intensified, and then it shattered into 1,000 sparks, dissipating into the night. The hum of the data core faded, leaving only the crackle of the fire and the sound of the wind. It is done, Selah said, opening her eyes. The data is gone. Ethan let out a slow breath, relief washing over him. Thank you, he said quietly. Selah turned to him, her expression somber. Do not thank me yet. This is only the beginning. My people will not forget this world. They will return one day, and when they do, humanity must be ready. We will be, Ethan said with conviction, and when that day comes, we'll prove to them, and to you, that you made the right choice. Selah nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. I hope you are right, Ethan, for all our sakes. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Selah stepped onto her ship. The sleek vessel hummed to life, its metallic surface shimmering like liquid light. She paused at the entrance, looking back at Ethan one last time. Goodbye, human, she said. May your chaos guide you to greatness. With that, the ship rose into the sky, disappearing into the endless expanse above. Ethan stood alone in the desert, the weight of her words heavy on his shoulders. But as the sun rose higher, casting its warm light over the sands, he felt something else, a spark of hope. Humanity had been given a second chance, and he intended to make sure they didn't waste it.